breaking news. The U.S. military carried out 3 airstrikes in Iraq, targeting facilities backed by Iran-sponsored militant groups, according to Pentagon officials. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the strikes are in direct response to a series of escalatory attacks against U.S. and coalition personnel in Iraq and Syria.
And we're also monitoring those exit polls coming out of New Hampshire. Polls close in the Granite State in less than an hour.
And we're going to get to that. But first, let's bring in The Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels. Brett, what's the latest from President Biden on these airstrikes?
Well, the White House has carried out these airstrikes essentially in response to what has been a sort of growing tit for tat, where we've seen Iranian proxies targeting U.S. personnel, targeting transportation and shipping in the Red Sea. And President Biden, Secretary Austin at the Pentagon have been clear that they're going to continue to sort of carry out these strikes essentially to protect U.S. personnel, to protect U.S. interests. Now, critics are concerned that essentially this is going to lead to a widening war in the Middle East in the aftermath of the fighting that we've seen in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. But what White House sources have told me is that they believe that these strikes against Iranian groups are the best way actually to contain the conflict, essentially, to ensure that U.S. personnel are protected. And President Biden himself just about 10 days ago was asked if he believes that the U.S. is in a proxy war with Iran, and himself said no, he does not believe that's the case. So expect to see more of this if Iranian groups continue to target U.S. personnel moving forward.
All right, thanks for that reporting, Brett. Appreciate that, and we'll let you now get back to work.
Now, Kevin, we're about, an hour away from polls closing in New Hampshire, so we're getting the first exit polls out. So I want to go through some of this data because, this is a make or break night for Nikki Haley. So this will sort of give us an indication of how voters are going to break tonight. The first one I want to talk about is the ideology of folks going into the primary tonight. 24% say they are very conservative. 39% say they are somewhat conservative. Only 31% say they're moderate. And no surprise here, 6% say that they are liberal. So that being taken into account, is 31% who say they are moderate, those will tend to go for Nikki Haley. Is that enough for her to get the results she needs tonight?
Well, we don't know, right? Because there's two things. When you look at Iowa, which obviously moderates in Iowa are a bit different than moderates in New Hampshire, but the suburbs in Iowa, suburban Des Moines, for example, broke for Trump. And Haley had been arguing that she was, in fact, the person who would be able to attract that more moderate support. Now, earlier today, I spoke with the GOP strategist, Matt Bartlett. I know you talked with him frequently as well. And Bartlett said that the independent voters who are able to vote in this are a bit different than moderate voters. And so there's this confusion between what exactly it means to be a moderate or an independent. And what I mean by that is some of these Trump voters who Trump was able to get back in 2016 were trying to decide between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
Right.
And so in this cycle, they're trying to decide between RFK and Donald Trump. That could be bad news for Haley, but the stakes have never been higher for Nikki Haley. If Trump is able to win by more than a 10 percentage point margin, it's going to be really tough, not just from a delegate count. Remember the magic number, 1,215 delegates is the number you need to clinch the nomination, but from a donor count. How does Nikki Haley justify continuing her campaign forward to the Nevada, as well as South Carolina, where she's was governor, and she lost Senator Tim Scott's endorsement, current senator. She's the former governor of South Carolina in the Palmetto State. How does she justify to the donors continuing forward? What are you hearing from your sources?
Well, look, I mean, just today she said that she's going to come out with another ad buy, about $4 million, I think it was, for the next state. So it shows that she's ready to continue spending cash in this race. She has said countless times, she had that memo today, relax, I'm continuing, I'm not going anywhere. People need to take a deep breath. I don't know who she's talking to there, but she's saying folks need to take a deep breath because there's a lot of speculation of if she doesn't perform well enough tonight, will she keep going? And of course, the next state is really important to her. It's her home state. So I think there's a lot of focus on what's going to happen after tonight. But I want to talk about something. You mentioned those undeclared voters. And obviously, when you talk about New Hampshire, it's unique because those folks who aren't members of a party are able to vote in this primary. We have some exit data polling on them. 49% of folks who were in the primary tonight for the exit polls are registered Republicans. 47% are registered undecideds. That's virtually split evenly. And of course, we've spoken about Nikki Haley having this edge with those undecided voters. I mean, what do you make of that? That's a very even split.
New Hampshire is first in the nation for the primary for a reason. You can go all the way back to 1960 when a guy named John F. Kennedy won the New Hampshire primary. You flash forward back into the current era where Senator John McCain, the late Senator John McCain, won in 2000. But think of Hillary Clinton. Remember, she teared up. It was a whole thing after she had lost the Iowa caucus in 2008. New Hampshire in particular takes their role seriously in the message that they send to the rest of the country. And so the same way that what they signaled back in 2008 was they wanted a longer primary, the message from New Hampshire, should Haley pull off an upset, is that they want the Republicans to battle this out. Nikki Haley wins. It will be one of the greatest comeback political stories since 1992, when then Governor Bill Clinton won in that New Hampshire primary. So I don't know is the answer, but that's what we're going to find out. But there's something else that's happening.
Right.
And when you look at the Decision Desk HQ polls that Scott Tranter has, at the Decision Desk HQ. When you look at that, what you're noticing is that foreign policy is playing in this.
Yeah, it's big in this cycle, which you don't typically see.
Well, you
typically see domestic issues, but we're seeing foreign policy have a play here.
Totally agree. Spot on. And I would add to that, because economic security is national security. Immigration security, border security is economic security.
Right.
That's been what we're seeing in the crosstabs reflected, where you now have immigration as issue number one. What's happening overseas right now in Iraq, there's a reason, right, that Trump had his supporters holding up the signs that said peace through strength when he was in Manchester over the weekend. And that peace through strength message is reminiscent of Reagan, some would argue, which is what his apparatus is trying to position for moderate voters. But in contrast to that, it's a very different policy, because at the same time, what he's saying, and you know this better than anyone, Schnell, is in direct contrast to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Huge.
Peace through strength is a slogan, but it's not necessarily a policy. He doesn't want to be in NATO. He said, some of his supporters, Steve Bannon has said that. He doesn't want to fund Ukraine in the way that Leader McConnell does. So that peace through strength, when there's rising geopolitical risk, expect that message in a general election to be on full display. What are you hearing in terms of how that plays with the message that's coming out of Washington, D.C. and Congress?
I mean, I'll say first, especially you even talk about foreign policy, because the two candidates have such stark different views on this, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. And we've heard Nikki Haley say this in interview after interview, debate after debate. She's, of course, wanted to talk about foreign policy, being her experience at NATO, being that she's very skilled on the topic. So I think that we're going to continue to see more of this, because it's a way that she can draw a contrast. But I mean, absolutely, this plays on Capitol Hill. I mean, right now, look, we're talking about border security, these ongoing border security negotiations, which are meant to unlock aid for Ukraine. We're already seeing former President Trump weigh in, encourage conservatives, reject any deal unless you get everything on the border. Now, look, Kevin, you know this also. Compromise is needed on Capitol Hill. There's a Senate filibuster. You need at least 60 votes for anything to pass, which means by nature it has to be bipartisan and an agreement. So if you're having Trump say conservatives don't do anything unless you get everything that you want, I mean, that's impossible. That's never going to happen.
But at the same time, it positions him as an outsider, right?
Right.
Because now it's not just Trump versus Biden, it's Trump versus McConnell.
Sure.
Now, quite frankly, McConnell's still in office and Trump isn't, so there's that. But specifically back to New Hampshire, there's something else. He's saying peace through strength, and yet his policies are arguing what his supporters would say America first through isolationist policy.
Right.
But he's also arguing something else. And this is what the Biden sources that I'm talking with are worried about, those swing voters. There's an anger. There's still an anger, specifically as it relates to the opioid addiction. You had Trump over the weekend saying that there needs to be a stronger death penalty. Trump is now talking a lot more about the death penalty, specifically for drug cartels. That plays in northern New Hampshire, or at least it did in 2016. Berlin, New Hampshire, where Jeb Bush went and Trump went, and turned out ultimately in that primary for Trump. So there is a sharpened rhetoric that I'm noticing based on covering him that is more precise. It is a bit more nuanced. And it is playing specifically to what we're seeing happen internationally.
Right. And if we just stay on this topic of international, and we look at the exit polls, this America First mantra is aligned with the MAGA base and what former President Trump shepherded in. There's an exit poll from CNN that said, do you believe in the MAGA movement, which I think fits into this. Do you believe in the ideology of Trump, or do you believe in the ideology of foundational conservatism, something more like Nikki Haley? 32% said they would consider themselves part of the MAGA movement. 64% said they would not.
That's good for Haley.
That's striking.
Yeah,
that's striking.
We're going to have to leave it there. Michael Schnell, excellent reporting in terms of what's going on and lumping it to Congress and what's happening there in New Hampshire. And we'll see you next hour with another update on America's Vote 2024.